Ya estamos, perfecto. Buenas noches, familia, buenas noches, amigos de YouTube, amigos de Instagram, bienvenidos a Going Deeper con Leo Severino. Bienvenidos, bienvenidas a su casa, aquí en la Ciudad de México. Mi casa es su casa, y gracias por acompañarnos a esta presentación llamada Going Deeper con Leo Severino. Vamos a darle la bienvenida a Leo. Un segundo, no me cuelguen. Fallas técnicas, por favor. Paciencia. A la 1, a las 2 y a las 3. What's up, Leo?
Fratrazo, ¿cómo están?
Frater del alma, ¿cómo estás? Hermano del alma, bienvenido. Una vez más, bienvenidas, bienvenidos a Going Deeper con Leo Severino, filósofo, teólogo, productor de cine, guionista, profesor y actor. Cada día le vamos a aumentar una más, tú tranquilo. Estás en mi programa, yo mando, así es que cada día vamos a aumentar un título, un oficio más a Leo Severino. No, además es un excelente actor y bailarín.
¿Así, bailarín?
Sí.
¿Qué estilo?
Rap. Hip hop. Muy bien, señores, damas y caballeros, estamos aquí está lloviendo. Llovió fuerte hace rato aquí en la Ciudad de México, en esta área donde vivo. Ya se tranquilizó, pero sigue lloviendo. Así es que, pues vamos a... ¿Cómo está ya el clima, Leo?
Está tranquilo, estaba lloviendo esta mañana en Nueva York, pero ya está bien.
¿Qué hicieron hoy?
Filmamos. Todos los días estamos filmando.
Están filmando todos los días. Muy bien, muy bien. ¿Qué filmaron hoy?
No puedo decir.
Ok. Ok. Es sorpresa, ¿verdad? Es sorpresa.
Confidentiality, no puedo.
All right. Well, then...
Pero es comedia, te va a gustar.
To the point, ¿no? Vámonos con todo. En Facebook, Leo me mandó unas imágenes que las subí a Facebook para que las puedan bajar. Alguien las tradujo al español, creo, ¿no?
Sí.
Y si no, mañana las subimos en español también, estas 5 imágenes que subí a mi story de Instagram, pero también en mi Facebook para que las puedan copiar. Entonces, ¿en qué nos quedamos, Frater?
Estábamos hablando de las facultades y de los... no sé si estaba claro en algo. Actually, why am I talking Spanish? I bet people will appreciate that, but I don't want to mess it up, so I'm switching back to English. We talked about the human faculties. No need to review them. Mm-hmm. We should all hopefully have a better grasp of them, especially now. Whoops. Am I sideways now to everybody?
Yeah.
Is that how this works? Trying to send it up.
I thought that was like the new style of teaching Going Deeper this way, you know?
My reference. So now that you have the charts, hopefully I'm going to trust everyone to review them on their own. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. And so that I'm just going to get into it, presuming that you know about what we're talking about by way of the definitions. And if you don't, then the charts are on a lot of those pages, and we can we'll do some review, but not a lot because we got a lot of ground to cover. Okay, so we talked about the human faculties. We talked about how we're in touch with reality through all of our lower faculties, the senses, the imagination, the memory, the cognitive power. We talked about how the images that we get from reality are abstracted and conceptualized in our intellect, whose purpose is to grasp the truth. How that image then goes to the will, where a judgment is made by the intellect, presented to the will. The will can decide to either follow the truth that's presented by the intellect or not follow the truth. This is an important thing that we haven't talked about at length, and that is that process, that shift from the intellect to the will. That shift from the intellect to the will is because there are different faculties, there are different powers. One is about causing stuff in reality, about choosing. The other is about grasping the truth conceptually, so that because they have different objects, there are different faculties, there are different powers, and as such, they each have their own end. So the goal of the intellect is to present the truth. That's what it's designed for. When we conjure on something, when we conceptualize something that is false, we actually aren't using our intellect. Our intellects can't grasp that. All they grasp is the falsity, the lack of the truth. So if I was to say, for example, 2 + 2 = 7, that becomes meaningless to us because the equals doesn't mean anything anymore if the plus means something and the 2 and the 2 means something. Same way if I was to say square circle, which is something that we know can't exist, it's false, there's no such thing as a square circle, we can't conceptualize that. So the intellect has no choice but to grasp at some truth. And that is what it presents to the will. So let's say, for example, we're talking about something that is not virtuous. Let's say that we accept that temperance is one of the virtues and that it is therefore wrong for me to overeat to a crazy extent because it's going to be bad for my health and my vigor and everything else that is necessary for me to properly think and to properly act, to properly think and choose. So let's say I'm at that 17th slice of pizza and I'm going to eat it. Now, the intellect has to present something to the will that is true. If the intellect were to be habituated to prudence, that's what we talked about last time, and it had the knowledge and the understanding that I've already eaten sufficiently, and it presented that to the will, then the will, being a blind faculty, what I mean by that is the will doesn't conceptualize anything. The will only acts upon what the intellect presents to it. If the intellect only presents, don't do this, the will can still choose not to. We can choose to ignore what we know to be true. But when we do, it has to be because we perceive some truth. Someone said, you will barf. Yes, if we ignore the fact that we're going to barf, right, that's a true statement, because we still want to eat the pizza, we just want to get the taste out of it, what we would have to do is conjure up something in our minds, even if it's automatic, even if it's unnoticeable, that the will then acts upon. So, for example, in that case, it might just be the taste. I'm not going to think about my health. I'm not going to think about the consequences. I'm not going to think about barfing. I'm just going to think about vomiting. I'm just going to think about some truth that I can grasp, that the will can choose it. Now, Claire is saying she's disagreeing. I expected that from you, Claire. You can ask me your question later. Hadley asks, what if emotions are driving them? Well, that's exactly right. That's a great question, I should say. The emotions, if they're properly ordered, all they're going to do is move us towards the truth and the good. If they're improperly ordered, they're going to put a perspective on the image, like in this case, the taste, and that it's really good. And that perspective is going to be the truth that we're grasping in our intellects. So the emotions have the ability to put a perspective, to knock the intellect one way or the other, so that when it presents it to the will can only choose based upon what the intellect has determined. That's important for us because that's going to make sense of how what we need to do is clarify our images. We need to have our images be in touch with reality. Why? Because from the beginning, we established that God has created reality purposefully, that there's intelligence embedded into reality itself. When we conceptualize, when we abstract out a truth, when we see a four-legged creature that has a tail and barks, and we abstract out dog, the thing either is that or it is not that. And that is true of every single thing that we conceptualize. It either corresponds to the truth or it does not. If it corresponds to the truth, then we are getting to the will of God ultimately. Why? Because not only does God embed intelligence into the design of everything, it shows what his will is for that entity, including ourselves. So the more we are off on what the truth is, the more we're going to be off on what God's will is in our life. I see a bunch of questions scrolling, and I will get to them after this session. So hold on to them, and if it's something that you think is important, then please repeat it after I say it's time for questions and answers. Okay, so hopefully this makes sense, this part of it, that the intellect, the goal of the intellect is to have a very, very, very clear image. And that image is distorted by a whole bunch of things, including our emotions. And virtue is that thing in us, the habits that we can acquire to try to control all of our lower faculties, all of the faculties that we share with the animals, and elevate them to what is proper to humans, and that is what's proper to the life of reason. It is in our reason and in our intellect that we are able to live beyond just the purely creaturely state of everything else that we know of in the universe, right? So that's the methodology. If the intellect has clear images, then the clear images can be presented to the will. The will, being its own faculty, can still choose to reject the intellect and say, listen, it doesn't say anything, but it just rejects the image and rejects the truth. This is called conscience. This is called that process when we might be deliberating, should we do this, should we not do this? It's because even though we might have a clear image, I shouldn't do this. There's still something in us that wants to do it. It's either something in our emotions and in our concupiscible appetite or our irascible appetite, or it might be something in our will. Our will is just prone towards this thing. We just want to because we want to. And so what we have to do is rationalize, not reason, not work on the virtue of prudence with knowledge and understanding and circumspection and foresight and caution and all those things that we need in order to make right decisions. Rather, the will keep slapping back the intellect and keep requiring the intellect to bring up an image, by the way, to ignore the images that we know to be true and just focus on some truth, some image that then is the one that the will can act upon. I want it for this particular thing. Normally, by the way, it involves some sort of illicit pleasure. And so what's happening there is this. The will is going contrary to the purpose of the intellect. The intellect has grasped the truth. The will decides, I don't want to act upon that truth. And so the will forces the intellect to go against its very nature. In other words, it does violence to the intellect. And what happens when we do violence to something? The thing gets weaker, the thing gets wounded. In other words, every single time we sin, every single time we go contrary to our purpose, we're actually darkening our intellect. What is at once clear to us when we're deliberating, I shouldn't do this, after a while, not only becomes obscure, in fact, the bad becomes the good. What I thought was at one point wrong, after enough doing it and rationalizing it, because I have to focus on the good, the thing becomes not only okay, it becomes good. And it becomes so good that I start being maybe even vocal about it and start going forth and saying, this is the way it must be. And how dare you interrupt me from doing what I want to do, right? Now, this is presuming what we're acting upon is, in fact, objectively wrong. And yes, that's right, Aaron. And then the continuous action upon that sin, upon that thing that is contrary to our purpose and our design, that violates the will of God for us and reality, that becomes a habit.
A vice.
How's that?
A vice.
Exactly right. The bad habits, the habits that are ordered towards what's not proper to our faculties, is the definition of what we call vice. And here's the crazy part. For every virtue, there's actually two vices. Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas and all the great theologians teach, all the great philosophers teach, that virtue is in the middle. It's in the mean. Same with truth. Truth is never either too much of something or too little of something. 2 is not 3 or 1. 2 is 2. And same with virtue. So for every virtue, there is two vices. There is the excess of the object and the too little of the object. That's the mean. That's exactly right, people. The golden mean. It's right there in the middle. And that's where we need to reside. Because of our fallen nature, we have a tendency to go normally towards the excess, but sometimes towards the defect. So, for example, too little, if we haven't gotten to this yet, but one of the sub-virtues of fortitude is courage. It's bravery. And that's a required virtue. A lot of things we have a horror, a fear of doing, even though they might be good. But courage, bravery is right in the middle. Too much, that's a vice. That's called foolhardiness. I'm just going to go attack that castle with my sword, and even though there's 100 soldiers that are defending it, right? I'm a fool. That's not being more brave. That's being foolhardy. Too little courage, we already know that vice. That's the vice of cowardice. The virtue lies right in the middle. There's such a thing, obviously, as gluttony, right? That's the vice against fasting, where we are in excess. But it turns out that there's a thing that's also called gluttony. That's when we eat too little, or when we eat too daintily. I suffer from that one. I hate to confess, right? My wife, God bless her, she knows I don't like bananas, so she won't feed me bananas. There's nothing wrong with bananas. They're actually very good for you, all right? Just because I don't like the taste, my emotions are so strong against the banana. I have such a bad cognitive association that I see them as actually being bad. Well, that's not good because they're not bad. So something is wrong with my image and my perspective, right? That's actually a form of gluttony. It's a form of gluttony to the defect. So I'm not overeating, I'm undereating. I'm thinking things that are bad when they are not bad. My reason isn't dictating, just my emotions are. Now, is it a sin not to eat a banana? No. But is it an imperfection? Yes. Why? Because in my mind, I see them as good. Now, I see them as bad, even though they in reality are good. And apply that to all kinds of stuff. I'll give you another one that's even more ridiculous. My wife, God bless her, I got over this, and I hate to confess it, but I will. And we'll keep this amongst the 200 or 300 people that are on right now.
Yeah. On YouTube.
And everyone on YouTube?
Yeah.
Oh boy, and everything that's going to be repeated on
Yeah, it's okay. Don't worry. We're one family here.
You told me that there's a few thousand people that are watching.
There's a few journalists, un par de periodistas y reporteros. Yeah.
Right. It's not so ridiculous. I don't like the boogers and tomatoes. You know what I'm talking about? The tomato, the goopy, boogery, snotty stuff in the middle of the tomatoes.
Yeah.
My wife, she would de-booger the tomatoes for me. She's really sweet. God bless her. But that's just such a ridiculous thing. Now, again, is it sinful? No. Is it a crazy vice? No. But it is a minor imperfection because there's actually nothing wrong with the boogers in a tomato, right?
Right.
You get my point? Well,
and I'm sure we all have something like this,
That's exactly right. And even more serious, there's things, let's just talk about that sub-virtue of temperance. Temperance is the moderation of the appetites relative to the body, which is called the concupiscible appetite, which moderates our appetites, right? And so it orders the way we react to things of food and rest and sex. Well, we talked about the sub-virtue of fasting. And that sub-virtue of fasting doesn't mean just not eating. It means eating as reason dictates. And when you go deep into it, we won't tonight, but I'll give you some examples. Eating when we're not hungry. Eating when it's too soon to eat. Eating too greedily, too quickly. Why would eating too quickly be an imperfection? Why do you think that, Doctor? Eating too quickly. Why is that?
Even when you're by yourself?
Yeah, even when you're by yourself. Eating too quickly is considered a vice and imperfection. When you think about it, it actually makes sense.
I don't know, the lack of I don't know that one.
You're exactly right. The lack of something.
Patience. I don't know.
Yes, it's a lack of control.
Okay.
Why is it lack of control? If it's not reason that dictates the fact. Now listen, if you're in a hurry and you got to scarf something down, that's something. But generally speaking, everyone's nailing it, right? It's because it's your emotions that are then controlling. You're not actually you're not savoring the food. Exactly. It is your appetite that's just rushing. That's the only reason we're going to eat quickly. It's like, I want this, right? And it's not the reason dictating. And so your body's not able to process everything properly. All the science, everything says that you should chew a whole bunch, you should swallow, you should wait for digestion, all those sorts of things help with health and vigor. So they say, and it makes sense, eating too quickly is one of those little tiny vices that isn't a part of the perfection. Obviously, eating too much, eating too little. We know that there's tons of people, sadly, that suffer from eating disorders, right? And we intuitively know that it's not right. Mm-hmm. And we intuitively know if someone's grossly obese because of their own choices, because of their own they're not suffering some biological thing, but they maybe lack some sort of self-control, or they're way skinny. There's something in us that when we see that, we recognize, oh boy, this isn't what is the standard, is the norm, it's what's proper. There's something that's contrary to our design. And both of those turn out to be insanely unhealthy. Right now with coronavirus, they're finding out that obesity turns out to be one of the conditions that makes it so the people are most susceptible. And on the other end, we obviously, if someone's suffering from bulimia or having eating disorders, we know that they're not getting enough proper health and nutrition. So there's a whole bunch of ways, each one of these virtues that tell us, or that show us that the virtue's right in the mean. It's not too much or not too little. It's just right. It's like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, right? It's not too hot, it's not too cold. It's right there in the middle. That's where the virtue
and that's why the word virtue means fortaleza, virtus, no? Because it requires a lot of strength to be in the middle, right?
Exactly
it's como un trapecista, no? Que in order to be in the middle, it requires a lot of work, a lot of focus, a lot of strength, a lot of fortitude, a lot of discipline.
Right. Yes. And now it's not. This is we're talking about something whose object is very small. But then when we get to much more serious things like lying or cheating or sins, other sins against the flesh, or things that are very, very grave, it's all part of the same continuum. It all starts with a vice. That vice distorts the truth. That truth that's distorted is acted upon by the will, which is evil, and then it just snowballs and snowballs and snowballs. So just talking about this one little thing, let's just talk about that fasting, just to finish the thought. How do we make sure that we are living the virtue of fasting? Well, it is reason that has to dictate. So the continual practice of the moral theologians and the saints and the people who we know to have lived this sort of stuff properly, all the philosophical and theological manuals about this, and the example of the people who we would say are good examples in this particular area, is you decide how much you're going to eat prior to starting the eating. Right? Once the appetites get into play, well then no reason isn't part of the table. Right? So the idea is decide before. Here's how much I want. For those who maybe have a tendency to overeat, you have to probably eat less. You have to live in the defect so you can land in the mean. For those who undereat, maybe you have to eat a little more. You have to live in the excess so you can land in the mean. That's the idea. It's reason comes to the table, makes the judgment prior to the emotions moving.
Controls everything.
It controls everything. But reason itself has to be moderated, right? Reason has to follow prudence. So we have to know the principles. We have to study these principles. We have to understand them. And we'll talk about how we're going to grow in all that in order to apply them. All right? So that's the big picture of generally how virtues work. And forgive me for not having brought that up before I started going through a long list of all these sub-virtues, right? Now, getting back to what we were discussing before and what we're going to get into tonight very quickly is there's that shaded out version of the faculties. Well, actually, hold on. Let me skip this slide because it's way behind. There we go. Give me a second. That's the one I want to go to, I think. Yes, we got the cardinal virtues, right? We got the temperance, which is in the concupiscible appetite. We got the fortitude, which is in the irascible appetite. We got to prudence, which is up there in the intellect. And in the will, we got justice. And recall, each one of these virtues is actually opposed to the very wound that we received from the violence that was done to our natures from our first parents, from Adam and Eve. So in the concupiscible appetite, the wound that we suffer from this state that we live in of original sin, that wound is a wound called concupiscence. Concupiscence is concupus means flesh. It's of the flesh. It's our desires, our disordered, immoderate desires of the flesh. The wound to the irascible appetite. The irascible is the one that is ordered towards the arduous. The wound there is weakness. We find it very difficult, and we're going to go into fortitude tonight, but to engage those emotions in an ordered way. We find it very difficult to engage the arduous, to persevere in the good. In the intellect, the wound is darkness. And darkness has all kinds of parts. It's a lack of acuity. It's a lack of perception. It's a lack of depth in our intellect itself. We find it difficult to think for a very long time, to have clarity of thought, and those sorts of things. These virtues can be acquired. And then finally, in the will, there is justice. The wound there is malice, a disinclination from the good. Justice orders us to the good. Justice we'll talk about tonight, but it's defined as giving every person their due, including God. And if we're giving God and all of the people that we interact with their due, including ourselves, guess what? That means our will is always ordered towards the good. Some people have been asking, I noticed in the scrolls, and I noticed also in my direct message, you can always direct message me a question. It might take me a while to get to you. I'm getting a lot of them, and I thank you for those. But someone's asking me, well, what about grace and God, and can we do all this on our own? The answer we know already is we can't get to our final end, which is God, on our own. Why? Because he is beyond our nature. We only have natural means of our own, so we're going to need some supernatural bridge. What I'm talking about here is this. What we're going to talk about when we talk about grace is a supernatural thing that we can access. But that grace builds upon our nature. In other words, you have to acquire the natural soil that has to be fertilized so that grace, the supernatural thing, can build upon that, right? And so inasmuch as we grow in natural temperance, then we can grow in supernatural temperance. Inasmuch we can grow in natural prudence, then we can grow in the supernatural form of the same virtue. But at first, we have to do the work ourselves in as much as we can and is within our power and in our control. All right, so last time we talked about the sub-virtues of, what did we talk about? We talked about prudence and we talked about justice. I'm sorry, we talked about prudence, we talked about temperance, right? Tonight, we're going to go through briefly over fortitude and justice. I wanted to cover humility. I'm not going to be able to tonight. So let's just go quickly over fortitude and justice. Now, here we go. Fortitude, if you recall, give me a second, my phone is acting weird. Fortitude, as you recall, here's our tree, is that virtue that resides in the irascible appetite that engages us towards the arduous. The definition of fortitude is perseverance in the face of the arduous. That very faculty, the irascible faculty, where daring and hope and anger and fear and despair, where those emotions reside, it's all meant to be ordered towards the good. It's all meant for us to use them to their proper extent so that we can achieve the arduous good. So is there a time when anger is necessary? Yes, there is, and we'll talk about that. Is there a time when fear is proper? Yes, there is, and we'll talk about that. But they need to be ordered. These are the virtues, some of the sub-virtues, there's plenty more, that moderate our irascible appetite. In other words, they order us towards the arduous. Constancy, also known as fidelity. That's a weird F, so sorry about that. Constancy is the virtue where when we are engaging in something that's difficult, we stick with it. It's when it's that virtue where someone has decided they're going to run a marathon and they're at mile 23 and they don't stop. They keep going. That's constancy. We're going to talk about how to develop these briefly, and we're going to go into depth into a bunch of these later, right? But how do you develop constancy or fidelity to what you've said, to what you've determined that you're going to do? The answer is by repetition. And it requires, in fact, regiment. We have to not rely, just like when eating, we can't rely on our emotions, our appetites to eat. Our reason has to come to the table. So with our irascible appetite, we have to have reason dictate. Reason itself has to come to the table, and regiment. Here's how we're prudently, meaning we have to know, like, I'm not just going to be able to run a marathon tomorrow if I've never run a marathon. I have to prudently determine the steps that are necessary and stick to those in order to develop that virtue of constancy. Once you get used to, for example, waking up at the same time every single morning, then after a while, you're just able to do that. It doesn't require much effort. Why? Because you've developed the virtue. Give me 1 second. I'm plugging in my phone. Okay, so that's the virtue of fortitude. I'm sorry, that's the virtue of constancy within fortitude. Here's another sub-virtue. Turn this around. Patience and longanimity. So everyone has hopefully heard of that term, patience is a virtue. Patience is defined as enduring suffering without losing your cool, basically, right? With equanimity, right? It's having peace in suffering. People confuse patience. They think if I'm sitting at a red light and I have to wait a long time, that's patience. That's technically not patience. Patience is when you have to endure some sort of suffering, right? Now, if the red light happens to cause you an interior angst, then that's a form of patience. But patience is generally when there's some sort of thing that's actually causing you a particular discomfort. And then there's longanimity. Longanimity is the ability to, it's called longness of soul. It's the ability to await the good. Yeah, long suffering, exactly. Right? So both of those are insanely important virtues. Why? Because half of this life we're dealing with stuff that we're going to have to wait for.
Half?
Right? And say again?
Half?
Yeah, exactly.
More. I would say maybe
right
more.
Now, right now we're suffering because of this coronavirus, right? But even more, we're awaiting the good when we're able to leave our houses and return to our normal lives. This is a virtue. Why? Because the irascible appetite, which is ordered towards arduous, when it starts moving, remember that's what the emotions do. That's why motion is literally in the word. They want us to move. They want that motion. And if they want that motion, then we can get irritable. That's why the irascible starts with ira. It's the same root. It's about that itch that we have. And that motion of its own, what does it do? It has the ability to cloud our judgment. So we have to control that. And we control that by growing in patience and longanimity. How do you grow in patience and longanimity? By developing the virtue of constancy. The more we have constancy, the more we're going to have patience and longanimity. Munificence and magnanimity, these are awesome virtues. Munificence is greatness of soul. I'm sorry, magnanimity is greatness of soul. Munificence is greatness of mind. So munificence is this. It's engaging in the mentally arduous. Right? In order to get this, I said 2 nights ago, we talked for an hour and a half. That's just too much for anybody. But it was my gift to you guys. I was giving you a taste of the virtue of munificence. The virtue of munificence is that ability to be able to focus on something for an extended period of time. Now, why would we need that? Again, because there's times that things require not just days, but weeks, if not months, to think about in order to have a clear image. And the inability to sit and think a thing through, despite the emotions moving, makes it very, very difficult to us to have clear judgments. Munificence is a virtue whereby we engage the mentally arduous. How do we grow in munificence? By studying. Studying when, do the moral theologians say? Every day. Every day we should have some sort of spiritual reading, some sort of philosophical or theological reading. Every single day. Does it have to be a lot? No. But let's grow in the habit of thinking of the more difficult things, the deeper stuff. That's why I call this thing Going Deeper. And that's why the subtitle of the book is the reasoned exploration. We always want to be engaged in our reason to explore. And the more we do this, guess what? The easier it gets. There's even a sub-virtue to munificence, by the way. One of the sub-virtues of munificence, not listed there, is called studiosity. It's engaging in studies. Magnanimity is greatness of soul. It's striving for great things. The magnanimous person is the one who does magnificent things, right? So all of us are actually called to greatness. Greatness as defined by our own stuff. Eduardo is a great example of a magnanimous guy. Here's a guy who, from his room in quarantine, he's giving you guys this access to hopefully something that is true and good and beautiful. He's recording a record with Alexandra Acha. He's done so much to try to change the world for the better. So many great things.
Praying a rosary.
Praying the rosary with 10,000 people every single day. That's both munificent and magnanimous and magnificent, right? Now, how do we grow in magnanimity? By striving for greatness in our things. By picking things in our lives that we can be great at. It doesn't have to be anything that's going to change the world in a very tangible way, or in a very visible way to many people. But if you're great at cooking, if you're great at exercise, if you're great at whatever it is that is your talent, we're not called just to take our talent and not develop it to the best of its abilities. We're called to be magnanimous. We're called to have greatness of soul for our soul, our intellect and will, to move upon our lower faculties to get them to strive for greatness. There's a great quote by Benedict XVI that I love. He says, "The world offers you comfort, but we are not made for comfort. We are made for greatness." That virtue, and greatness is difficult. That virtue that gives us greatness is magnanimity. And how do we do that? By striving for great things. Courage. Well, we know that one. That one's obvious, right? Here's the interesting thing about courage. We might think this. We might think I don't want to pick on anybody. Let's say an X person ran into a fire and saved somebody's life. It's a fantastic thing. It's a beautiful thing. It's courageous at a certain level. But if they come out and they said, "Boy, I was afraid and I went in anyways," that's technically not the virtue of courage. That could be the virtue of fortitude, right? Because it was engaging the arduous. It could have been it could be it's a magnanimous thing that they did, right? But it's technically not courage. Why? Because courage in and of itself doesn't allow fear to come into the equation. So people who actually have the virtue of courage, you develop it. How? By engaging little tiny things that we are afraid of that are good. So the spiritual life itself actually comes with this horror. It's called the suffering. And we grow in that. So let's say I have a fear, if you will, of bananas. How do I get over that? By eating the banana. And I do that long enough, my horror of banana goes away, and then I don't have it anymore. So with courage, the actual virtue of courage is the lacking of the fear doesn't come into the equation, and it's that just going because reason dictates, regardless of the bodily, the necessity of bodily harm or the possibility of bodily harm. Arwen is drawing a bunch of little bananas there. Thank you so much. Meekness. Meekness is often confused with weakness. It is not. Meekness is one of the most strong, one of the most, one of the most amazing of all the virtues. Meekness is a virtue that moderates anger. Right? And why should anger be moderated? Because we said it's that complex emotion that pushes out of control. And what it does is it really obscures the image. When one is angry, it's not the time to try to reason with the person. We can't reason. Mm-hmm. There's all these what's called daughters.
Don't write a WhatsApp. Don't write an email or anything when you're angry.
Don't try to get into a conversation with someone who's angry. It's going to be fruitless.
Yeah.
There's meekness is one of the hardest virtues, but it's one of the most fulfilling and it's one of the most rewarding. In fact, we're going to do probably one, if not two sessions on meekness alone, because there's an entire process and it is beautiful. Yes, and when anger actually blocks us from being able to speak the truth, when it's immoderated. So here's a little clue as to a little teaser as to when we talk about meekness. How often do we think on a daily basis should we be getting angry? Is anger just? The answer, almost never. Anger, because it's so complex, because it's so vehement, it's actually ordered to something very, very, very rare. When we find that we're being angry, we generally find that we're acting upon a vice and not on a virtue. Mm-hmm. Finally, the virtue of silence, a virtue that many people wish I had more of. It's not what we think it is. Silence isn't just shutting your mouth. Silence, in fact, is speaking as reason dictates. So, in fact, remember the virtue's right in the mean. The virtue of silence is not speaking too much nor speaking too little. There's times when we shouldn't be speaking, when it's detraction or calumny or gossip or all these other vices that are us using our speech in a way that isn't in line with our purpose and with the good and the true and the beautiful. And then there's times when we should speak and we don't. The virtue of silence is the one right in the middle. The crazy part about the virtue is, why is it part of fortitude? Why is it part of the arduous? Why? Because it's not just an external vice. We get a certain pleasure from talking. In fact, neurobiologists have pinpointed the part of the brain where we get a certain pleasure from talking. Women, you're gonna hate this. It's also an asset, but it turns out that your pleasure receptors in your brain from speaking are much more vehement and numerous on an average level than men. Women get more of a pleasure from speaking than men. And we know it seems like a stereotype, but it also kind of rings true to us, other than times like this when guys are talking a lot. Guys generally talk less than women, right? Well, there's it's an asset. And it's an asset, just as everything that is good from God, because we also find that the tone in women's voice, the pitch of women's voice, to babies and to toddlers and to the young, is one that they are able to facilitate their neurobiological components more. And so we find that if there isn't a whole bunch of words that are given to kids at a very early age, they actually have mental disabilities. And they're not able to desarrollar, they're not able to
develop. Mm-hmm.
To develop. Thank you, Fratid. That was awesome. I couldn't get an English word and you got it for me. Wow, that might be.
I'm here for you, Fratid. I'm here for you.
I appreciate it. They're not able to develop properly. And so that perfection that's given in women can also be disordered. Same with men. Right? When we should be talking, we don't. Right? There's times when the guy just doesn't want to and he just shuts down and he goes away from his wife or whatever else. Art and Beauty just said 4,000 words a day for women, 2,000 words a day for men. That's exactly right, right? There's something in us. There's a complementarity to the both of us, because there's a time when we should err on those things that we see naturally in men, that's silence, and then a time when we need to be speaking and err on the side of the excellences of women. It's a beautiful complementarity, right? So see, fortitude is an awesome virtue. And each one of these, we're going to talk about silence at length. We're going to talk about meekness at length. We're going to talk about constancy at length. The other ones we might talk about in shorter spurts. All right, and then finally, let's move over to justice. Justice is a virtue, again, that moderates malice in the will, orders us towards the good. And this is what's really cool, is all of these have as the object some truth or actually some good. Our good in speech is honesty, when we order what we speak towards the truth. Why is honesty such an incredibly important virtue? Well, it should be at some level very obvious to us, shouldn't it? The reason honesty is so incredibly important is because it requires our will to force our intellect to do its job, to order us towards what is actually true. Now, the virtue of honesty, again, is right in the middle. How is that possible? Isn't truth just truth? And so if you're giving people their due in truth, then obviously you can't err too much of it, then you're not giving them truth, or too little, you're not. It's not about the truth. Truth is, of course, in the middle. It's sometimes we shouldn't be saying things even though they are true. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we should be saying things even though we don't want to because they are true. So honesty rests right in the middle, just as all the other virtues. Give me 1 second, because I'm trying to find a slide here that's important to what I'm talking about. Folks, hang in there for 1 second. Here it is.
Man, the battery is dying. 1 second.
Your battery's dying too? Everyone, can you give us 1 second for technical difficulties here? I need to find a slide. Where is it?
Vamos a ver hasta dónde llega.
Give me 1 second, folks. I don't see it.
1 second.
Oh boy, can't find it. Oh, not meant to be, not God's will. So here we go. We're going to keep going. So honesty is, remember, the virtue of justice is giving each person their due. Honesty is giving everybody their due, including ourselves, in words. Philia, or kindness, is giving everybody their due in deeds. Again, a massive virtue. If we are kind, if we are honest, we're halfway there, because we're already dealing with ourselves and others in ways that are proper to what is required of them, what is due of them. People are actually owed kindness. We actually owe them the virtue whereby what is proper to them is given. What does that mean, right? What does it mean to be kind? Again, we're going to go through this one at length as well. The Greek word is philia. It's that virtue of brotherhood. What is owed to people? Precisely what we would want of ourselves. That is kindness. And we know that because we have a nature whereby it is natural to us to love ourselves. Even the people who commit harm to themselves, as twisted as they are, it's rooted in a love for themselves. The harm is committed to themselves because they hurt. And they might think that in the doing the harm, they're trying to get away from some hurt. If there's this notion now of, people, you gotta love yourself. It has to start with loving yourself. There's a certain truth to that. There's also madness to that. Are you right, Eduardo?
Yeah.
There's a little madness to that, right?
There you go.
Because we do love ourselves. Here's a way to know that we love ourselves. Imagine if every one of us had another person in our lives that we treated exactly the way we treat ourselves. People would think we adore that person. We wake them up, we wash them, we bathe them, we trim them, we clothe them, we cook them breakfast. We're thinking about them constantly. We're looking out for their best interests. If we treated, literally, if there was a clone of yourself and you treated it externally the way we treat ourselves, no one would think that wasn't love. It would be the height of love. We would think, my goodness, this person must really love this other person, right? Just in the cleansing alone, in the hygiene alone that we take, right, to take care of ourselves, right? That's an incredible love, right? So love of self is actually built into our very nature. Why? Because love, remember we defined it as willing the good. We will the good of ourselves. We are hardwired for that. And as such, if we can see that in ourselves and we share the same nature, the same design, the same essence, the same purpose with others, then of course it follows that we should be treating them in the same way. That's the virtue of kindness. So this is what is due in words, honesty, what is due in deeds, philia. Let me come up to here. What is rectitude and obedience? What is due in deeds to proper authority, right? So kids need to obey their parents. It's just part of the natural law, and it makes sense. It's prudent. The intellect will recognize kids don't know, and so it requires an authority to give them. Same with us in the law. We are called to follow just laws. Why? Because presumably the law is based on the common good. And if it's based on the common good, then we should exercise it. Why? Precisely because it is what is due. It is not up to us, unless we have that position of authority, to determine the law. What if the law is unjust? Well, then, of course, a law that goes contrary to the laws of God and reason are ones that we don't need to obey. How many of those are there? There's probably very few. So if you get to the stop sign, just stop. Right? We'll talk about rectitude as part of justice. Restitution and accountability. That's giving people our due when we say we're going to do something. Right? If Eduardo and I say we're going to be on Instagram at 10 o'clock, hundreds of people are going to be relying on us. So we have to be accountable to ourselves. And then if we don't do the thing, we have to make up for it. So if, for example, I'm going to use an example when we talk about different things later. But if, for example, I stole Eduardo's watch, and then I was really sorry, and I said, Eduardo, I'm very sorry that I stole your watch. And he forgives me. Then it's done, right? Justice has been met. The answer is no. Not if I still have the watch. I have to give him his watch back. Justice requires giving him his due. And his due isn't just my contrition. It's also restitution. I have to be accountable for what I have caused to bring the equality back. Justice is right in the middle, right? It's that equality. If the contrition, my being sorry, is what turns me to try to make it right with him as a person in my words and my deeds, in my benevolence, in my kindness and in my honesty. But in restitution, I have to fulfill justice by giving him his watch back. Or if by taking away his watch, I've caused some other harm, I have to give him back his watch and then pay for what I have done. I know, I owe you a watch back. Actually, Alejandro owes me some sunglasses. I got to remind him of that. Let's go back to benevolence. Benevolence, that's goodwill. This is the virtue whereby we can accept what others are due to us, or what others try to give to us. In other words, this is the person of goodwill. If our will is closed, we can't be just. Why? Because we won't accept, for example, the truth that others are saying. This is a sort of hardness of heart, a hardness of our will. The person of goodwill is the person who hears the truth and then wants to do it. It's not the person who's like, no thanks, right? Or just shut down. We know a lot of these people, particularly when it comes to talking about God. Right? Don't come at me with your religion or whatever. Hey, but I just learned a thing that is very reasonable, that we can start from the leaf falling from a tree and talk about causes and effect and philosophy. No. We're closed, right? Generally speaking, that shows a hardness of the will, right? It's also known as having this open heart, this benevolence, this goodwill to accept things as true and not being closed. Because if we don't have that, if we don't have benevolence, then our will won't be ordered towards the good. It will be ordered towards not the good, which is malice, right? How do we grow in benevolence? There's steps to it. We'll talk about it. Virtue of gratitude. Gratitude it's a virtue. It's not a feeling, and it is an incredibly important virtue. The virtue of gratitude is the recognition and acceptance that is resting in the good. It is, in a sense, us giving back for all the good that we have received. So first and foremost, who should we be grateful for? God. That's exactly right, because he's given us everything that is good. Secondly, we need to be grateful to each other. And there's actually a process for growing in the virtue of gratitude, and we'll talk about that. But it starts with the recognition of the good. If our focus is on the bad, remember, the will is a blind faculty, so the intellect has to start by focusing on the good so that the will can turn towards the good. And that's where gratitude resides, right? If we're constantly focusing on the bad and the negative and the bad, first, we're going to be angry. Second, we're going to lack gratitude. So we're not going to see reality the way that it is. Piety or dulia, that's a form of honor. That is giving honor to those that require it. So we think of piety just as like pious little devotions that maybe people have, praying and whatnot. Well, there is a piety, there's an honor that is due to God, obviously. And that is, we should go above and beyond because of the nature of God himself. We should honor him with what? We're going to talk about prayer and devotions and all those sorts of things that he is actually due. Sacrifices and worship and these sorts of things, right? But there's also a piety that is owed, for example, from kids to their parents. They need to honor their parents. We're going to recognize that when we talk about the commandments. There's a certain honor that is due to our parents. There's a certain honor that is due. I don't care whether you like the person who is the president or you dislike the person who is the president. We're going to see that all authority actually comes from God. It's part of the authority structure of humans. And there is a dignity to that office. And because of the dignity to that office, whether it's Obama on one extreme or Trump on the other extreme, it doesn't matter. The office itself is due an honor, it's due a piety, it's due a dignity. And that actually is part of justice, and it is something that is insanely important. Finally, for tonight, to finish off the sub-virtues of fortitude, it's the virtue of religion. How is religion a virtue? Isn't just religion just this belief that's based on faith, that's not rooted in anything natural but supernatural? The answer is no. We came to the existence of God through through reason itself, through natural means. We came to the purpose of life, not by talking about faith or something that's revealed that we can't know by the light of reason, but through the very nature of man himself relative to the nature of God himself. As such, there is a natural compulsion, there's a natural instinct, there's a natural inclination for us to actually revere God. This is why there has never been a culture in recorded history, in all of history, that didn't include some belief in a supernatural and some means to address and honor that supernatural, to give that supernatural what it is due. That is the virtue of religion. It is as old as humanity, and it is as universal as humanity, and it is as natural as humanity. And the virtue of religion requires that there's actually parts, there's proper acts, and we're going to talk about those. But it's the height in a certain sense of justice, because whereas this is giving our due to our neighbor, ourselves in speech, and to our neighbor and to ourselves in deeds, and to proper authority and piety and dulia and record and obedience, and to others, this here is giving God his due. We need to get rid of the notion that religion is irrational, that it isn't part of reason, that it's just about the supernatural, and it's just about the divine, and it's just about faith. It's more than that. It has a natural component. There's such a thing as natural religion, and it is the basis, in fact, of everything else. Everything else builds upon that. Hopefully that made sense, and hopefully you guys enjoyed tonight. Yeah. And let's see if there's any questions.
And the word in itself, religion, religare, what it means is pretty much that, give back what belongs to him. But it's give back God. Give back what belongs to him, but it's religare, estar conectado con Dios, no? It's to be really like attached with him,
Exactly. It's to reconnect.
Reconnect.
It's where we still get the term relationship, right? That's where we get religion as well. It's the same.
Religare. All right. So question. So I have one question, Frater. For example, like so many people will be asking, like, do we need all these rules? I mean, can you imagine just by memorizing all these rules, I'm going to be like a prison. I'm not going to have a life, which I know the answer is the opposite. But how can you explain that by living like this, actually you will be more free than ignoring all this?
Exactly right, Patrick. Well, here's the thing. You can't escape this. Because of the nature of our intellect and our will, every single person is going to be acting on some belief. And if that belief is in line with reality or it's not in line with reality. If it's not in line with reality, then they're never going to be fulfilled because we're going to be going contrary to our purpose. As much as we might have some shiny pleasure or some flashy thing that distracts us, we will never be fulfilled. So this is true of all human nature. Everyone is going to live by rules. Everyone. We're forced. The will is a blind faculty. That means the intellect has to have a concept which presents a judgment to the will in every act.
Awesome.
Period. You can't escape this. No one can escape this. The question we should be asking, what we should be examining is what we believe to be true or not. And when we know that it is true and we act upon it and it is good, guess what? Fulfillment will naturally follow. And every single person who goes through this recognizes this, and they recognize it in the same way. Someone had a question. Did I answer your question about that?
Yeah. Good. Beautiful.
It seems like a bunch of rules, but it's the exact opposite. It's freedom. It's setting the fence around the playground so we can play and not get hit by a bus. All right. Someone asked about Hitler. Should we have respect for Hitler? As a person, no. But at that time, relative to the office, if you were a German citizen, and look, most people were ignorant about what was happening in many ways. Some people might not have been, but nonetheless, it's the office itself. Now, the office itself can be rooted in a totalitarian way that makes it so that we don't have the height of a certain form of honor or piety to it.
Father, can you hear me? I'm reading here that no one can hear me, that nobody heard my...
That was just for a little bit.
Oh, okay.
You're delayed. We're good.
All right, cool.
Let's see. What about good intentions and ignorance? People don't know these things the way they really are, and that's why they reject it. Well, we're going to get ultimately to the fact that we can only be judged, right? We have to be, if justice is a virtue whereby we relate to God, then it ultimately starts and comes from God himself. We will only be judged for what we know, right? So if we're ignorant of this stuff, we can't be held accountable for what it is. But it's better, as Socrates said, to be a human enlightened than a pig happy in mud. In other words, what we're trying to do here is not find a way to hold people more accountable. We're trying in these lessons to give people ways to be more fulfilled and to grow in more of our perfections and more fulfillment in our lives. All right, let's see. There's a bunch of nos escucha, and let's get through all of this, and then I'll get some questions. We'll just do a few more.
Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Father.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Someone asked, I think it's Nena asked, so if I have no religion, but I have a connection with God, the personal level, I'm presuming saying at the personal level, is it still religion on a different perception? That's exactly right. If you have some sort of connection and relationship with God, then you are acting, whether you want to or not, a religion, right? In other words, you're trying to give God your due. And if it's just a personal thing, that's all well and good. But let's say somebody else happens to come and believe the same thing. Guess what? Now you have a public religion because it only requires two. And whatever your notions of God, the bigger and more important question is, are they true? In other words, it isn't just I have a connection with God. Is it the real God? Is it the true God? In as much as am I following all the properties that I can discern of God or that he might reveal of himself, right? So if it's a God that creates all reality and then separates itself from it, the deist God, well, then that's not God. If it's a God that is many gods, we know there's only one. We prove that with the first cause. Then that's not God, et cetera, et cetera. So the more important, everyone's going to have some version. Even atheism at some level is a belief in something that encompasses all of reality, right? So it requires a certain amount of faith. Everyone's going to have, in some sense or another, a form of religion, a form with relating to the ultimate. It's just a question of whether we can discern what is true or false about that belief. ¿Cómo se rompe el ciclo de vicio? How do we break, Cachi Romero says, how do we break the cycle of vice? By growing in virtue. First, we're going to see each virtue has a methodology. And it starts by recognizing what our vices are, what our predominant ones are, and attacking them by developing the habits constantly of the contrary virtue. What is this question? Let's see. Where can I find this information? You can find this in the Summa Theologica by Thomas Aquinas. You can find this in the Nicomachean Ethic by Aristotle. You can find it in the works of Gary Gula-Grange and others. And you'll find it in my next book, which hopefully comes out this year.
But you know what? Actually, I have a good idea. So tomorrow, Leo and I, we're going to put together a list of books, like maybe 10 books, easy to read, because the Summa, it's a very, very high-level reading for big philosophers and theologians. But there is other books that actually can help a lot. So Leo and I will discuss, and tomorrow we'll bring you a list so you can start with that.
That's a great idea. There's a great, and thanks for mentioning that, Eduardo. Two that come right to mind. We'll give you the list tomorrow, but two that come straight to mind is there's a great philosopher out of Boston College. His name is Peter Kraft. He has a book, The Summa of the Summa, the summation of the Summa Theologica, which is fantastic. And there's another one who's long since passed. He was a British theologian. He has a book. His name is Frank Sheed, and he has a book, Theology and Sanity, which is fantastic. Someone asked, how do the virtues relate to the fruit of the Spirit? We're going to talk about that. The fruits of the Spirit are actually the effects of virtue. If you're talking about the gifts of the Spirit, we'll talk about that. There's things, the virtues are natural, but there's a supernatural element that's above those.
Y los dones también, the gifts. Is the same thing, the gift, dones? No, dones are gifts, right? Yeah.
Dones are gifts,
oh, yeah, okay.
Yes. Puede ser la resiliencia una virtud. Is resilience a virtue? Yes, if you mean fortitude, if you mean constancy, if you mean perseverance in the face of the arduous, then yes. Is it possible that we as individuals feel connected with a virtue more than others, according to the way we're made? That's from Noala, or Noala Esclavitud. Oh, beautiful. Yes, our dispositions are such that some of us are prone to different vices, right? And some of us are really on the concupiscible side, right? Our vices are we tend to overeat or whatever, or are more lustful when it comes to matters of sex. And then others are maybe just more angry or more afraid or more sad and melancholic or despairing. And just as we all have these predominant dispositions of our matter and how they relate to our soul, so with virtues. Let's see. Oh, you guys can't hear them? They're still saying they can't hear you.
Really? How can you hear me and someone else cannot hear me?
Vos sí te escuchamos. That's very weird. I'm sorry, guys. I can hear him perfectly clear. And every time he's spoken, I've repeated what he said. So hopefully you guys got it.
Okay, let me see if maybe this is now. Can you hear me now?
People chime in if you can hear him.
Hello, hello, hello. Buenas noches. No, that's weird. Let's see.
Yeah, they're still saying they can only hear you. I think only hear me.
Okay. So, anyway, you're the one who is giving this presentation. I'm gonna be.
He says he's gonna be quiet now. And I'm gonna scroll back to questions. We got you guys, but you haven't missed much because everything he says I've been repeating. Let's see if you guys have any more questions. Let's take a couple more.
Maybe you can repeat just the question, Leo. That because I think it's a great answer. That no one can escape whether you like it or not. For those who think like, wow, this is I cannot live by these rules. This is crazy. I barely can.
Yes.
Wake up in the morning and trying to do good, and with all this now I have a headache. How can I live by this?
Right. So I'm repeating the question that Eduardo asked me previously, which was when I answered. My answer was you can't escape it. Right? Everyone has a belief. His answer was this.
His question.
His question was this. What if people? What about the question of people saying these are way too many rules? Right? And if I follow all this, don't I have to be like a monk or something? Like, this is way too much. Can I just live my life simply without having to focus to learn all this sort of stuff and not have these sorts of beliefs in my head? And the answer is what I said before is you can't escape. Everyone is acting based on some belief. And the question is whether it's true or untrue. Someone just said, Rocio Acosta says, pues de hecho podemos obtener las virtudes por medio de oración y ayuno, ¿no? The question in English is, can't we obtain the virtues by the means of prayer and fasting? But you can obtain the virtue of religion because of one of the proper acts is prayer, and you can obtain the virtue of fasting by fasting, but not the other virtues necessarily. Prayer and fasting might be the thing that gives you the grace, but we still have to cooperate with that grace in order to develop those virtues. So we'll talk about that when we get to grace. Let's see, 2 more questions. What do we got?
Remember this guy, Leo?
Hey, Boss Rutan, he's the man. I spoke to him yesterday.
This is our friend.
He's the best.
He teaches how to fight.
Look up Boss Rutan on Instagram. He's fantastic. I found that God has already put within us some personality traits that enable us to develop the virtue we need to come. Claude has said, I found that God has already put within us some personality traits that enable us to develop the virtue we need to counteract the vice. Exactly right. Just as he puts in us the dispositions that can lead to vice, are the same ones that can lead us to virtue. How should we react if people don't treat us with justice? Fantastic question. It depends on how they're treating us. But the long and the short of it is with forgiveness, because that's a virtue, with kindness, because that's a virtue, but it also can mean with justice. In other words, justice is still a virtue, giving people their due. If someone does harm, then it is just for them to pay back that harm. So it doesn't mean that we are weak and we just roll over, right? But it does mean that interiorly we have to disconnect so that our emotions aren't guiding us, which is a tendency when someone treats us unjust. Let's see, fun question. Let's see. A lot of those, they said you're practicing the virtue of silence. Let's see. Oh, can you repeat the name of the books, please, besides the Theology Insanity? I'm sorry, it's not Theology Insanity. That would be a cool title, but it's not that. It's Theology and Sanity by Frank Sheed. The other books that we're recommending is The Summa of the Summa by Peter Kreeft, Kreeft.
Yeah, but we're gonna write the list, and then I'm gonna put that list tomorrow on Story and on Facebook. So don't worry, you will have it tomorrow. 10 books, and then next month another 10 books.
Exactly right. Teresa asks, I guess fasting for religious purposes does not fall into eating too little, right? Generally speaking, that's correct. However, even the most hardcore of saints, in other words, there is a time when we need, because our tendency is to eat all the time and to not order that disposition. This is an opportunity to conquer our concupiscible appetite. However, if your vice is, not you, but generally speaking, if a person's vice is that they eat way too little, then those people should not be doing fasting, even for religious purposes, because it's going contrary to their disposition. All right, folks, that's enough for tonight, I think. Thank you, everybody. Love you guys. Appreciate your support. If you have any questions, have patience. Have longanimity. That I will get to answer them in due time. Okay.
Thank you, Frater. Buenas noches a todos. Él fue Leo Severino. This is Going Deeper. Tomorrow, 9 o'clock, Frater, 9:30.
Mañana como a las 9 más o menos in Mexico time.
Okay. Yeah, repeat after me just in case they don't hear me. So just say tomorrow, 9:30 Mexico time, and everyone is welcome. And tomorrow we're going to talk about.
He said repeat after me so everyone can hear me. He said tomorrow we're going to be meeting around 9 or 9:30 tomorrow. I'm in New York. Eduardo's in Mexico City. And tomorrow, I believe we're going to talk about humility.
Humility, beautiful.
The grounding of all these virtues. And then we're going to start picking some of these virtues in particularly, doing sessions on those. And then just so we know where we're going, then we're going to go back to Adam and Eve and say, now that we know what the natural virtues are, what sort of things can we see are set forth in the scriptures that lead through basically history and get us to where we are today. Thank you, everybody.
Well, say goodbye to YouTube friends.
Bye, YouTube friends. So long. Thank you for listening.
There you go. Buenas noches, familia.
Bye, Carla. Bye, Katia. Bye, Chayit, 78. Lorenita. Ciao a todos. Rocío. Good night.
Ciao, Frater. Buenas noches, Frater.
Igual, un abrazo.
God bless you, man. Dios te bendiga. Gracias.
Igual. Bye.
There you go. Él fue Leo Severino. Familia, creo que no me escuchan, pero bueno, a ver si pueden leer mis labios. Buenas noches. Los quiero mucho. Dios los bendiga. Nos vemos mañana. Paz y bien. Creo que hubo un problema. Al final no me escuchaban mis amigos de Instagram, pero bueno, escucharon a quien tenían que escuchar, que era a Leo Severino. Ya lo escucharon ustedes también. Teólogo, filósofo, productor de cine, guionista, más importante, mi hermano del alma, un gran amigo que tuve el honor de conocer en una misa en Los Ángeles, California, en el 2004. Y desde ahí hemos sido no solamente grandes amigos, sino socios, y hemos producido películas juntos, y es un gran mentor, gran amigo, hermano. Lo admiro, lo quiero y lo respeto mucho, y por eso quería compartir con todos ustedes sus presentaciones que están ya en el libro Going Deeper, que ya lo pueden obtener en Amazon, Going Deeper. Y bueno, estamos trabajando en la traducción al español para que lo puedan leer también en español. Familia, los quiero, Dios los bendiga. Gracias por acompañarme a estas presentaciones que todavía no pueden ver a Leo, pero muy pronto vamos a poder interactuar, donde puedan ver también ustedes a Leo Severino, y habrá otros programas más adelante también, el de Héroes Anónimos, que ya les platiqué más o menos de qué se va a tratar, y muchas sorpresas más. Por ahora, eso es todo. Buenas noches, Dios los bendiga, paz y bien.